Today we're catching up to Katie Barnes. Katie and I have been kind of chasing each other for a while now. The last time I caught up with Katie, she was in Kentucky. I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that. But finally, I've corralled her back in New Zealand around the Dunedin Way, in Otago. And I'm going to let you all sit back and have a conversation with Katie Barnes a little bit. So with that in mind, Katie, the podium is yours.
No worries. Thanks, Rob. Hopefully this is a little bit interesting, but I might just give you a little bit of history about where I came from or how I've got to where I am. So I'm a chemical engineer by training. I did my undergrad in Australia, hence the mixed Australian Kiwi accent. So I studied chemical engineering in Australia, and with no intention of going into the mining industry. I did a couple of vacation mining jobs and didn't enjoy them at all, and I graduated and ended up straight in mining, working for a technology company in Melbourne. At the time, we used to develop new mines and start new mining projects for what was then CRA, but is now Rio Tinto. So I spent a few years doing that. Before I got a bit sick of being city-based jobs, then I moved out to Northern Queensland and started on fly in, fly out type jobs, which are now really common, but I guess back in the 90s were probably not so common. There was still a lot of residential mining camps, so we were one of the early, or one of the original fly in, fly out mining camps. So I worked in Australia and overseas in South America as basically a process engineer, so working on the processing plant of mining. So I guess taking the ore and processing it into final metal, but basically in what they call base metal operations, so copper, lead, zinc, those type of commodity groups. And a lot of it was fly in, fly out, and a lot of commissioning work, so starting up new mines, getting them running, training people, particularly in South America. So training up in Argentina for about a year. And I kind of did that for about 4 years, and I guess I got a bit sick of not really having a home base. So my home base was kind of mining camps. Then I'd go back to towns to have time off, and everybody that I knew would be working, and I'd be sitting there during the week thinking, well, the only people I know that are off are people that I work with, and I'd hang out for the one weekend I had before that I was in any sort of city to do stuff with people that I didn't work with. So I got a bit sick of that and had a bit of a look around for other stuff I could do. And I'd been travelling a little bit then, and I'd been to New Zealand, and a job happened to come up at a gold mine in New Zealand. And I thought, well, that would be pretty neat. Instead of working in the middle of Australia, I can go and live on the coast in New Zealand and have a bit of a lifestyle and go home each night and just enjoy myself, I guess. So I ended up working at a place called Macraes Gold Project, which was in the South Island of New Zealand, about probably about an hour northwest of Dunedin. So I guess I moved from working in northwest Queensland at 50 degrees, or sort of 45 degrees. I arrived in New Zealand on the 5th of January, and it snowed on my first day at work, which is not actually very common in New Zealand on the 5th of January, but it was in 2000. So that was my first awakening to New Zealand. And I thought I would probably last maybe a couple of months before I left, because it would be far too cold for me, but I'm still here 17 years later. So obviously it wasn't such a bad move. So I stayed working in New Zealand for Macraes Gold Project, which then became Oceana Gold, for about 5 years. And I worked both in a technical role, basically, in the plant. So kind of technical superintendent, I guess you'd call it now, of their processing plant. So running kind of the metallurgists and the engineers there in the processing side of things. And I stayed there for about 5 years and worked in a couple of roles looking at developing new technologies there and business development with them. And then I guess probably got itchy feet again and decided I needed a new challenge. So I had some colleagues that I'd previously worked with in Australia who gave me a call and asked me whether I'd be interested in moving back to Australia. By that stage, I had settled in New Zealand and I'd married a Kiwi, and we had, a Kiwi, a New Zealander, for all of you who aren't New Zealanders, but we had a small farm in New Zealand then, and we had a business over here. And so I kind of did a bit of negotiating and said, look, I'd love to come and work with you, but I really need to have my home base still in New Zealand. So I ended up working for a technology company, still in mining, who are based in Brisbane, but I stayed based in New Zealand, and I would go over to Brisbane. We did a lot of work for internationally. So our role, the technology company, I guess, that I worked for grew out of the old Mount Isa Mines Process Technology Group. And it had been developed to basically develop technologies that were either more efficient, usually energy efficient, being that energy and power is one of the largest uses in the mining process, or one of the largest, I guess, costs in the mining process, in the processing part of the mining industry. So they looked at developing technologies that were more efficient from an energy perspective, and then the company had been set up to commercialise these technologies once they had been developed in the Mount Isa Mines process plant. So Xstrata Technologies, it was then called, were based in Brisbane and used to develop and market their technologies around the world. So I started working for them in the mid-2000s, 2005 possibly, and stayed with them for about 10 years. And we used to go and look at, a lot of the stuff we looked at was looking at optimising mining processes, so looking at processing plants that were out there that were struggling to make a concentrate that they could market to the market, I guess, and work out if our technologies could help them out, could benefit them in terms of energy efficiency. So that's pretty much what we did. So I worked a lot in grinding energy, or grinding efficiency, and grinding technologies, and also in flotation technologies. And so after, it would have been probably about, I worked for them for about 10 years, and we were taken over by another large mining company at sort of after a period of about 8 years. And I guess I probably started getting a little bit disenchanted with the mining industry. I looked around and I saw that there's a lot of really great stuff going on, but there's also some stuff, particularly maybe not so much in Australia at the time, but particularly overseas, where large companies seem to be doing stuff for communities, but from a compliance basis, because they had to rather than they really wanted to. And I guess I'd spent a long time working in mining, and I probably just started looking around for something that I thought I could add more value and do something more for society, maybe. So I looked around and thought I also needed to challenge myself a bit more. I'd been I'd worked in a couple of countries that I wasn't particularly impressed with what the mining industry was doing within those countries. So I kind of looked and thought, what do I want to do from here? And I looked at doing different research. I looked at going back and doing a PhD, and I came across a program run by the International Water Centre in Australia, which was a Masters in Integrated Water Management. And I guess I looked at it initially and thought water had been, and the environmental impact of mining had been something I'd been very interested in, but I'd had very much a chemistry and a chemical engineering background. And so I kind of looked for something that I thought I could use some of those skills that I had and the knowledge I had of the mining industry, and possibly and a postgraduate degree that I could use that knowledge and put that to some other use. So I guess that's where that integrated water management side came in. So I started studying that probably about 4 years ago, and I did that part-time while I was still working. Part of that was because I thought that was the path I wanted to go down, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I guess I was hedging my bets a bit, which is probably a bit of a cop-out really. But yeah, I guess that's where I came from it. So I did my Masters in Integrated Water Management and finished that about a year ago. So I guess that's how I ended up in the water scheme, or in the water side of things. I concentrated my Masters really not particularly on the sort of the water and sanitation side of things. I really focused a little bit more on kind of the social side and that social contract that people have with each other. And I guess the different, my final research thesis was kind of looking at the different players or the different stakeholders within a water catchment and the needs that they have, and also their impressions and their feelings that they have about the water and how it should be used, and those kind of, I guess, the pool of different uses of water within a catchment. So so that was a space I really looked at getting into. I think the social side I went to too, Rob, was more because I'd always been very strong on the scientific side and the chemistry side, and the water was, in terms of chemistry, the water was not such a big crossover for me, but the social side, coming from very much a scientific engineering background, was a really big step change for me, and I think I really wanted to challenge myself there too. I guess I might just step away from that a little bit, Rob. I guess the other side of the water has been, or understanding and doing my Masters has been really beneficial, and we have a small farm in East Otago in the South Island of New Zealand, and it's a coastal property, and it's actually on floodplains in the South Island. So doing and understanding and doing my Masters of Integrated Water Management has been really beneficial there, just in terms of the impact that farming's having on the waterways. And also, particularly in New Zealand, the rap that farming gets on it because of its impact on the waterways, and that's often very justified. Sometimes farming is actually a really easy cop-out really, or an easy target for pollution of waterways. It's not always farming, it often is, but in a lot of cases it's not. So just understanding different people's values of waterways and our water around this area has been really beneficial for me. And I actually did my Masters research thesis or research project within the Wakawati catchment, so looking at the different impacts and also people's impressions and understanding of the water from both a farming perspective, mining, which happens to be within the same catchment, and the local community, local fishermen, local stakeholders. So that's been really, really beneficial too. So I guess I kind of ended up in the water space, and my interest in the water space came from both angles, kind of the farming from a personal level, but also where I'd been working from a mining level and wanting to understand if there was some impact I could make or some way I could add value to local communities by understanding the actual mining process, but then also having a knowledge or being able to speak a language that local communities could use around those waterways and the impact that mining had on their local environment. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I am now, in a really brief summary, I guess. Halfway through my Masters, I actually moved out of the mining company and the corporate sort of world that I'd been working in. And a lot of that was, I guess, my move out of that started just because I'd become a bit disenchanted with working for large mining corporations. So I did move out of there, and I now contract. So we have a small contracting or consulting business, I guess. The head of it, we're based as an Australian company. I still work from New Zealand though. So we do a lot of work looking or helping people look at mining companies. We do due diligence work both for companies, but also for people that are investing in companies or people that are just trying to find out what's going on within the mining industry. So it's a really diverse range. The nice thing is you can pick who you work for then, and that's a lovely space to be in, where you're not working in the corporate scene, but you actually have that flexibility, I guess, to say, look, I do want to work in this job, in this particular space, and I'm really enjoying this. And other times you can say, look, that's just not an area that I'm interested in working in. So that's kind of really nice too. So that's kind of a very convoluted way of explaining how I got to where I am, Rob. Sorry, that was really back and forward a bit then.
Actually, it's really good. But, you were talking about looking at waterways. Do you look at it at the watershed scale itself, or do you just look at it a little further in?
Sorry, can you repeat that? My mic was a bit low then.
Oh, no worries. What I was saying was, when you look at waterways,
Yep.
look at it at the watershed scale. You look at it more holistically and come down to the waterway itself, or what?
Yeah, really. I guess that's what I did in my master's, is look at the entire catchment. So I went right up to sort of the top of. There's actually mine at the top of the Wakawati catchment where I did my master's, and then looked at that whole impact going right down. And I guess that's what I'm really interested in, because particularly if you look at some of the mining projects that I've looked at overseas, it's really an impact. It's not just the impact of the mine, if you like, but it's an impact of the entire watershed, like particularly what goes on in the local, in the land surrounding a lot of mining operations. And mining operations do get a bad rap as well, and some of that is totally justified. Like, I have no argument with that at all, but it's really understanding what is and what isn't caused by, I guess my thoughts are anyway, sorry, what is and what isn't caused by industry, or the impact that we have on the land and on the waterway and on the whole watershed and catchment area. And really being able to kind of separate out some of those things. It's very easy to pick the biggest, ugliest thing around and blame that, farming, mining, whatever, but actually understanding how to break some of those things down and break down some of those prejudices, I think, is really important too.
When you talk about impact, you also talk about mitigation processes or anything like that, solutions to the impact?
Yeah, that's what I'd be really interested in doing. There's a project that we've been looking at recently, which actually looks at, is there a way of, you have an impact, but is there a way of actually doing something with, if you accept that, our industry exists here, but actually looking at water and how you can, is there some way that we can process it and find a solution to actually, if whatever we dispose of ends up, it doesn't have a negative impact on the land around it, or on the catchment that we're disposing it into, if you like.
Yeah, when you were talking about even farmlands, I was thinking about back in Florida, in Florida, they actually talk about constructed wetlands.
Yeah.
Agricultural areas that actually allow the effluent runoffs go into constructed wetlands prior to going into main waterways. Yeah,
and a lot of mines don't have, or that I've experienced, don't actually have those constructed wetlands around them. Like, we sit there and we look at it in cityscapes, but we don't actually seem to look at it in mining landscapes, if you like. We have these big tailings dams that we put all of our tails into, and then it's just very much seems to be a mitigation thing, I think, of, making sure these tailings dams don't break. And obviously there's some very catastrophic failures of things like that, but we don't, building up those constructed wetlands, it doesn't seem to happen very often in the mining industry. I'm working with one project at the moment where they do actually have part of a wetland that they send a lot of their stormwater and stuff does go through all this wetland, but I don't see it a great deal around, stormwater runoff and stuff from processing plants. I don't see that going through constructed wetlands very much. So I don't see that. We seem to do these things and we construct wetlands, and we do, and we look at this from a stormwater perspective in a city area or in an urban landscape, but we don't seem to do that so much in our industrial landscapes when you get to these mining sites.
Yeah, I was thinking more of rural areas, in farms and all that stuff. I've seen it done successfully there. Tailing the tailing ponds, the types of chemicals that come out of that. I just have a hard time seeing anything biological, taking care of that stuff.
No,
That's me. I'm really a layman on that one.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, even the runoff from, because they're quite massive, sort of massive areas that you're talking about there too, and even how the runoff gets dealt from those, they're always very, very like artificially constructed. There doesn't seem to be a lot of thought that goes into that side of things, the runoff from those dams and from those ponds and how that gets treated. But in a rural and an urban landscape, we have ponds and we have other ways to treat our runoff, and it reads riparian vegetation, that type of thing, and we don't see that I don't see that a lot around mining, and not the mines that I've been to. There's probably some very good examples out there, but I just haven't been privy to them maybe.
Yeah, you were mentioning ponds and agriculture, but I was really referring to constructed wetlands and using plant material. Wetlands for agricultural runoff prior to going to a mainstream. We've seen that in Florida, and it works out really well. It's really,
Yeah.
Because that really grabs all the nutrients from the fertilizers and things like that, and mitigates that prior to actually going into the waterway itself. Tailing ponds are just another problem. I mean, I've read a lot of articles where you see a tailing pond is breached, and it just creates all kinds of havoc downstream.
Oh, and it lasts for so long. So, I mean, there's a lot more work that's going now into dried stacked tailings to get over that breaching. I mean, the disasters that happened in Brazil, a year or two ago, just devastating to local landscapes. And so there's a lot more work now that's going into that whole concept of, rather than actually putting wet slurries into dams and supposedly engineering these structures to be able to contain it, actually doing dry stack tailing. So you actually send a filtered cake out and stack it somewhere and cap that, rather than having the possibility that a dam could breach or break.
So you joined the club. What are your interests in the club, and how do you see yourself fitting in, and what do you want to get out of the club?
Yeah, so I guess I come from two sides, Rob. I was very interested in the Rotary clubs, and I'd been to one of the Rotary clubs in Dunedin a couple of times. I guess I was interested in what Rotary does for local communities and the impact they can have on local communities. I think it's also that connectedness to of people, I think, is really important. So I think it's a twofold thing. My challenge has always been that, because I work overseas a bit as well as in New Zealand, I was always a bit challenged by the commitment of having to be there every week. And I also don't live in Dunedin, so I'm 50 kilometres out of Dunedin. So it was just, that juggling was always a bit of a challenge. I was at a Rotary Club meeting down in Dunedin, and Steve was talking to me, and it was when I was doing my thesis, just towards the end of it, and Steve was talking to me and said, look, there's this Wash E Club that we have going, can we have a chat about it? So I started having a bit of a yarn with him, and I guess there were a few things that appealed to me. The first thing was Wash, of course, and that whole water and sanitation side. And I guess I've been trying to, I know why I went into water. I was really interested in that whole link with mining and water and tailings and local communities, and just trying to work into that space. I'm still trying to work out how I move there, and kind of making small steps in the tailings side. And I guess joining the Wash Club, one of the reasons from a purely selfish perspective was kind of working on some of those links with people that are also in that water area, and seeing how I can kind of develop those ideas of how I can do something beneficial for local communities, and looking at that processing, the impact that mining has on local communities, or not even mining, but just industry on local communities, and how the two can intermeld a bit. So from a purely selfish perspective, coming into the Wash, kind of meeting other other people working in that space was really interesting for me. I guess then the idea of Rotary's always appealed to me, being able to give something back to communities, and that was where I really liked the idea of Rotary, that if I could give something back to the community in that area, looking at water and sanitation and the environment, WASH seemed like a really good mix with all those things, and I guess that's why I moved to do my Masters in Water, because I was kind of looking for a way of giving something back but still using those skills. And the Rotary or WASH E-Club kind of seemed to be a way that I could use some of the skills that I had, but also give something back to communities as well. I don't know if that kind of makes any sense. So that kind of worked really well for me, as well as the fact that the E-Club allows me to still be part of Rotary, but not physically have to be in a particular spot every week to be part of that. And I think that's really important too, because so much of work that everybody does is really remote these days. And my work is, it's not remote from Dunedin. It's only 50 kilometres, but when you travel and stuff, you kind of lose those links a lot. So I think that was, so yeah, there were a few reasons, I guess, and the mix seemed to work for me.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by your conversation about watersheds, and I think, as you know, both Neil Van Dyne and Bruce Lindsay are working on a GIS mapping for Haiti.
Yeah.
It's good to see things also at a watershed level. Really understand how those natural water systems work. It's one thing to talk about. Okay, this is a water point. It's getting water by whether it's groundwater, deep wells, rivers, whatever. But what really is what's the watershed doing? Are we actually able to maximize and understand the natural system itself? And I think that might be something you might be able to bring to the table.
Yeah, understanding that whole system is just I just think fascinating.
So anyway, I think you were worried about being able to fill 30 minutes. I think you successfully did that.
I probably waffled way too much, though. I think might be my problem, Rob.
No, it's all very good. So basically with that, we're wrapping this thing up. Really appreciate you giving us the time to talk to you and learn a little bit about Katie Barnes and where you're going and where you've been. Thanks, Katie.
Oh, no worries at all. Thanks, Rob.